Hi, welcome, Francis Richard Conolly. How are you today?
I'm fine, Alexis, my dear. Very nice to meet you. How are you?
Great. It is so wonderful that I was able to reach out to you and you wrote me back right away. You even knew about my work at Organic Consumers
Yes.
Association and with Millions Against Monsanto. And I contacted you right after someone sent me an amazing film that you made called Everything is a Rich Man's
Tell,
Trick.
tell them the whole title, Alexis.
From JFK to 9/11, everything is a rich
That's a
man's
whole.
trick.
That's
It says it all in the title for sure. And it has some important history that everyone involved in our Millions Against Monsanto campaign should know. So I think you made this in 2014, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay,
You,
so it's
you
been
look
a
pretty
little while. I'm sure you have lots of new information that you'd like to share with us, but I'd like to start with just a little bit of a clip from your film
sure.
so that people understand my excitement getting to meet you. So let me see if I can share my screen and find the YouTube. Let's see here. Hold on just a sec. I'm going to find the YouTube page where I've got your film queued up. And I think I'll go full screen here. Do you see that now?
I do. Yes. Yeah.
All
There.
right, I'm going to hit play.
The wall next to his desk, and even his legendary pans of tanks were tainted by these sorts of practices, because they were made by I.G. Farben, who had entered into a cartel with the Rockefellers' Standard Oil. The government in Washington knew all about this and largely did nothing. Licensing arrangements for trading with the enemy in wartime were issued without any fuss, even to the extent that after the occupation of France, the Chase and Morgan banks in Paris simply carried on doing business as usual. The incredible truth, which the rich elite have managed to hide from the world for 70 years through their control over school books and our education system, is that the Nazi war machine was actually an American business. And for the Rockefellers, DuPonts, Harrimans, Walkers, and Bushes in particular, it was a highly lucrative business. For their part, Coca-Cola's contribution to the war effort was to sell billions of soft drinks to the thirsty Nazis while they were strafing and bombing Allied soldiers, particularly in very hot regions. In the desert, where refrigerators tend to be scarce, there were even stories of Messerschmitt pilots wrapping wet towels around bottles of Coke, tying them to their aircraft, then flying up to altitude, where the cold and the wind chill turned the wet towel into a solid block of ice. They would then dive down, crack open the towel, and enjoy an ice-cold Coke in the desert. If they had wanted to, the Western multinationals could have grounded the Luftwaffe and stopped the war at any time, because the German aircraft were totally dependent on imported supplies of tetraethyl lead, an additive which prevents knocking in aero engines. But Standard Oil kept the supply of this vital resource going through neutral Switzerland for the entire war. And any Dutch people who might be wondering at this point what kind of percentage the Swiss took from this little arrangement, they need to be aware that thanks to Prince Bernhard von Lippe of the Netherlands, the father of the recently retired Queen Beatrix and prominent member of the Nazi Party, Royal Dutch Shell gave Hitler millions of tons of crude oil for nothing. The Dutch royal family actually fueled the invasion force which annexed Holland and were instrumental in helping the Nazis to rape their own country. But most shocking of all is the truth of what really happened in the little Polish town of Oświęcim. This sleepy little hamlet just happened to be in an extremely mineral-rich region, particularly for coal, which Western industrialists had wanted to get their hands on for years. With the coming of the Hitler regime and the invasion of Poland, the fascist financiers had the bright idea of turning this conquered region into an investor's paradise by building a Nazi concentration camp near the town and utilizing the slave labor available to drastically reduce their own production costs. Few people are aware of the gigantic scale of the Nazi concentration camp network. and are blissfully unaware that the real purpose behind their construction was to make a profit for the rich, which is why they stole all the gold watches, gold wedding rings, and gold teeth fillings and melted them down into gold ingots. To this day, there are bars of gold lying in the vaults of the Bank of England, which have the Nazi swastika stamped on them. Gold stolen from Jewish corpses. It shouldn't come as any great surprise that George Herbert Walker's family were slave owners on the cotton plantations of 1930s America. Walker was used to organizing slave labor. So while his business associate, Averell Harriman, was paying for Hitler's 500,000 SS troops and supplying them all with brand new Thompson submachine guns, because he did, Walker took over the management of this new Polish concentration camp. And when his Nazi friends started complaining that they couldn't pronounce the name Auschwitzium any better than I can, they all got together and decided they had better Germanize the name into something which sat more comfortably on Nazi tongues. It was in this way that the world first heard of Auschwitz. Because the truth about Auschwitz and the entire Nazi war machine is that they were essentially no different to McDonald's. They were American business enterprises abroad, businesses which the richest European families invested in, and businesses which, because of slave labor, made obscene profits, which Prescott Sheldon Bush took and placed in a blind trust, which later financed a Bush political dynasty, which produced two presidents of the United States, his son, George Herbert Walker Bush, and his grandson, George Walker Bush. This picture of the railway leading into Auschwitz has, since World War II, become the iconic image of the Holocaust. To us, it now represents something like the gate to hell. But how differently, one wonders, would we have looked at this image all of our lives if we had always known that this railway line was an American railway line laid by the Harriman brothers on behalf of Uncle Sam. The Standard Oil IG Farben cartel even made the Zyklon B gas for the Jewish Holocaust. Now, anyone who at this point is thinking that all this simply cannot be true, because if it was, someone would have sued, well, someone did. This information came into the public domain because of a Dutch intelligence agent who was so disgusted when he found all of this out, he leaked it to the press, as a result of which two very senior Jewish gentlemen, Kurt Julius Goldstein and Peter Gingold, filed suit against the American government. Of course, the more discriminating among us will now be asking how it can be that this story went completely unreported in the mainstream media. One might just as well ask why the Times in London was writing favourable stories about the Nazi concentration camps throughout the 1930s, and why Lord Rothermere was still referring to Hitler as a great gentleman as late as 1940. You really would think by now that people would have realised that it isn't so much the bias in the media which really matters, it's the things they know about, but never tell you, that really matter.
I'm going to stop there, although I did get immediately sucked in again. I often turn on videos like this while I'm working, as to double task. Somebody said this was amazing, I should watch it, and I'll put it on and I'll be writing or doing my other work. And for your movie, it's 3.5 hours long. And I ended up just sitting here glued to my computer, not moving, just watching the whole story. And, it gets, how can we say it gets worse? I don't know if you can say it gets worse, but it doesn't get any better from that point. And the revelations are stunning. It's a history that I was somewhat aware of, but put in context the way you do, because you start way before World War II and you end in the modern era. In context, it's even more chilling. Have you watched it recently? Do you have any reactions to seeing your own movie after a few years? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Unmute myself? Oh, sorry. What does that mean?
You're good. Oh, now you did mute yourself. I think Corey unmuted you. So we're good now. All right.
Oh, technology. No, it's actually, if I could just add one thing there, Alexis, because I think maybe you'd better. I think because of what you've just done, and I'm so grateful for what you've just done, especially with this being live on Facebook. There'll be yet another huge amount of people who will have seen that for the first time. And there's a couple of things I'd like to say about that. First of all, when, to my great surprise, Newsweek, who are, let's face it, the mainstream media, when a journalist first looked at the movie, he warned everybody and said, whatever you do, do not try to split this movie into sections because it's 3.5 hours long, and don't try to watch an hour here because you won't do it. And his reaction was exactly the same as yours. He said, if you start to watch this, you'll get hooked because it's like a great novel. You won't be able to put it down. And that was the most beautiful thing anybody has ever said about me or about my work. And I'm just wondering as well, I'm thinking that there's bound to be a few people who will have seen that now for the first time and learned something about their country for the first time, which is very, very difficult to handle. And there was a lot of letters, one in particular from this American whose name I was never able to pronounce. He was called Cyrus Shrazad or something. I mean, you probably would be able to pronounce that. I couldn't. But what he was basically saying was, Mr. Conolly, I was going through life as a happy American. I thought my country was the greatest thing that ever lived, and I was, stars and stripes this, and there's nothing wrong with us, etc., etc., etc. And he basically said, you don't know what you've done to me. You've made me fall down a manhole. I don't want to be an American anymore. I don't want America to exist. If this is what we really are, we need to stop this country right now and start again with something else. And then beyond that, his basic sentiment was echoed again and again and again and again and again. And that was why I feel they banned the movie, because I want all your viewers and all the people involved with you at OCA to know this, that this film, even though it was being seen by a billion, it was being watched over 1 billion times.
Wow.
It was banned by Donald Trump and the Queen because it was having too much influence.
Yeah, well, I assume that people do know this history. I've been working at Organic Consumers Association since 2005, and over the years, many people have sent me articles similar to this about this history of IG Farben. But just to make clear for anybody who is seeing this information for the first time, IG Farben after the war was broken into various companies, and two of them, BASF and Bayer, became sellers of agricultural chemicals and then eventually seeds that were genetically engineered to work with agricultural chemicals. And then, of course, in 2018, Monsanto merged with Bayer, dropped the name Monsanto, and became Bayer. And my staff and I, we were just talking, Corey, actually, who's back in the backstage area of this broadcast. He and I were just laughing over this because at the time, I was contacted by a Wall Street Journal reporter who wanted to write a silly article for entertainment purposes about the Millions Against Monsanto campaign and all the hate that Monsanto had. And haha, won't it be funny on those activists that named all of their campaigns after Monsanto when the company becomes Bayer and Monsanto's name isn't around anymore. And he wanted me to try to think of creative ways. But I thought, this is just perfect because these are two hideous companies. They might as well merge and share a common history that then we can tell the world about. Yeah. And really, when we talk about Monsanto, we are talking about Bayer. We're talking about BASF. We're talking about DuPont, which is another famous name in American oligarchic history.
Yes.
And so so now everybody who's watched this little bit knows the bit about Monsanto and Bayer's Nazi history. And now we're getting people in the chat adding to this. Carrie Ann says, I have been waiting for people to discuss this connection. In 1917, Bayer and BASF and I guess Hoechst, now Aventis, formed a consortium called IG Farben. or IG Farburn. I'm not sure if that's a
if you want to pronounce it correctly for those who are sticklers, Alexis, it's actually Ege Farben. That's how a German would say it, Ege Farben.
Ege Farben. In 1933, Hitler said, how can we kill millions of people at a distance? And say it again.
Ege Farben.
Said, we'll build you Auschwitz, and produced Zyklon B gas. In 1945, the Allies broke up the consortium back into their respective companies, Bayer, BASF, Hocht, which is now Aventis.
And that partly, Alexis, was to hide the truth, you see. And I'll bet that this lady who's just given us this information, she is obviously one of those people who's been writing to me since the movie was made. And one of the things that was most gratifying was that they added to the wealth of information that's in my movie anyway. In the movie, we get to, or your audience, your viewers will get to hear all about the sinister connections between American industrialists and Nazi German industrialists, which is incredibly important historically, because it's all been buried. And once the movie went viral and it basically it became the biggest movie in the English-speaking world, even though the mainstream media never once talked to me about it, had me on TV about it, or they just buried it completely, ignored me completely. Once it became the biggest movie in the Western world, people started writing to me and they were saying, Mr. Conolly, did you know that Mercedes were in? I mean, there wasn't time to put it in the movie, you see. It was already 3.5 hours. But did you know that VW, Mr. Conolly, were just as involved? Did you know that that all of the top motorsport brands? Did you know? And there was even people who said, did you know that Hugo Boss, who was still around,
yes,
they made all the uniforms. So you see, every layer of German industry, every single layer of the Nazis, they were all involved in this, and the Americans basically were operating out of each other's pockets. That's the history that has been totally suppressed, totally hidden, that I wanted to bring out, because it was this history which in itself was the forerunner to the Kennedy assassination.
Right. Yeah. Very important. In Washington, D.C. this fall, I'm part of an organization that's bringing a new film on the Kennedy assassination. It's called The Assassination and Mrs. Payne. So we'll be showing that in Washington, D.C., but it is available on streaming services. And it's, these people are still alive. Ruth Payne, who helped set up Oswald to be the patsy, she is still alive and telling her story. Yes. And so this documentary is all focused on Ruth Payne, how she fit into the conspiracy, and how she will tell you to this day, her version of the story. And
I saw a very decent, there was how they got her into court, I do not know, but I did see something briefly online where she was in court and somebody was saying to her directly, well, we know now you were a CIA agent. And I hope again that your viewers can find that somewhere. I think I looked for it and found it, as with most valuable things, that had been taken off, but somebody else might have uploaded it again. But what's very important about Ruth Payne is that it shows you how intelligence operates.
Yeah.
It shows you. You see, Ruth Payne could not possibly look more like Mrs. Ordinary.
Yeah.
She's the last person you would ever dream could be a secret agent. I mean, how far is she from James Bond?
Right.
and how far is she from the kind of woman who James Bond would have sex with, if you see what I mean, in one of the James Bond movies? Well, he wouldn't, would he? You're not going to see a woman like Ruth Payne in a casino with the blackjack and the boobs hanging out of the posh dress. She could not be more of an American housewife in the 1960s. She's got ordinary stamped on her forehead, and yet she was the most consummate actress at making people think, oh, I was just this, little thing in Oak Cliff, and I knew nothing. And when this man came through and said, Oswald did this, well, she was one of the greatest intelligence agents the CIA ever had, and it would be very interesting, if it was possible, for someone to ask her, have you seen Mr. Connolly's film? It's rather sad, actually, that her name never got into it. Again, you see, it was 3.5 hours. There was things I had to leave out, but I would be how I wish, Alexis, that you and I could be in the same room with Ruth Payne. My
Well,
God.
the filmmaker Max Good got to do that, and he did get that footage that you talk about. That was a mock trial where she was used as a witness in a mock trial. She agreed to it. She has always stuck to her story like glue.
Yeah.
Back to our original topic of Bear, Carrie Ann has another piece of information. Fritz Termeer, a Nazi scientist charged with crimes against humanity at Nuremberg, served time and was then made chairman of the board of directors of Bear again after his release. And Carrie Ann has included a Wikipedia link there. So some of this history isn't hidden as much as I guess it doesn't become part of the official narrative, but it's available to us if we look into it and if we share it. So I really appreciate you, Carrie Ann.
A big thank you, I think, to Carrie Ann Johnson. Thank you very much, Carrie, for that. Appreciate that.
And someone has asked if this recording will be available for later listening. Yes, absolutely. So anybody who's clicking the link now can go to the beginning of our conversation or at any time re-listen to this. And for anyone who's just joining us, we are talking to Francis Richard Conolly, the filmmaker behind JFK to 9/11, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. So Francis, you now have a book version of this. I was able to, I wanted to get it real quick. I should have just ordered the book copy, but I wanted to get it quick before I talked to you. And I was able to get it on Kindle. So it's available as an electronic book, and it has all the photos and everything. It's very easy to use there. And I skimmed through it, and it's essentially you've put down the narrative from the film into book form, and it's now available from Trine Day.
I mean, it is basically the script, and it was very difficult, as you can imagine, for my publisher and for myself. When you've had this as a film, there's so much visual. I can't say in a book, now you have to look at this, now you have to look at it. So that part was rather difficult. But one thing I'm finding very interesting, Alexis, is that since the book was produced, the last chapter is the afterword, and I took that opportunity to have a lot to say about things like Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew and whatnot.
Yes.
And I've been rather surprised that nobody has kind of come back at me with anything from that. I thought that the afterword would cause a lot of controversy. But, and I want your viewers to know this, it seems, and I cannot tell you what's going on. I'm an Englishman. I'm 5,000 miles away. I'm not in America. I just do not know how they've done this or what's happening. But my understanding is that they've even managed to ban the book. My understanding is that it's not appeared anywhere in bookstores in America. I went into the whole thing on the understanding that the distributor was going to get it, obviously, into bookstore windows. And what I was doing was writing, blurb here and there, saying, look, could all of the people who are desperate to see the sequel to my film,
yes,
could you please, pay for what I gave you for free, because we had to put it on YouTube. People didn't have to pay for it. All of the people who first discovered it, like Todd Cedars, was it, said, it's only going to cost you your time. It won't cost you anything. And I made the movie for nothing. So, I gave it to the world for nothing. So I was trying to say to people, look, please, could you now buy a copy of the book to pay for what I gave you for free? And hopefully that will give me the revenue to make another movie. And the book hasn't sold at all. It's only, as far as I can make out available online. It doesn't seem to be I went into my own city centre when the release date came along and found it wasn't even in the bookstore in my own hometown. And can you imagine what that's like?
Yeah, that's so frustrating. Well, we've seen this with other books that have come out in the last few years, and a good strategy is to go to an independent bookstore in your neighborhood and have them order it for you. And they will do that. And apparently that's how the New York Times catalogs bestsellers. So there are just a few independent bookstores in each major city, and they're looking at their book sales, and they will count sales that are asked for by customers, not necessarily pre-ordered. There's no difference there. So if enough of us go into independent bookstores and order the book through those bookstores, then it will have to eventually be noticed.
Not
So
with
that's your assignment, everyone.
No, Alexis, I can tell you for certain that if my book was to sell 10 million copies in one day, the New York Times, all the other papers, and all of the mainstream media would still pretend that I do not exist and that the movie does not exist. I'm the man who has come along and said to the world, listen, it's dead simple. Every single thing in your life is a rich man's trick. It doesn't matter if you're at school, if you're in court, if you're working for the police or you're against the police, if you're a scientist, if you're someone like, it doesn't matter. Politics, everything. I'm the man who's come along and said every single thing is a rich man's trick. And how have they responded? They banned my movie.
Yeah, another rich man's trick. So Carrie Ann Johnson has another bit of history for us, and this is one I wasn't aware of. Martin Rumscheit delivered the 2017 Heilbronner Lecture at the University of New Hampshire on the topic of I.G. Farben's Crimes Against Humanity. People can watch it here. She's got the YouTube link.
That's a great link. Martin Rumscheit. Oh, that's a difficult word for you and I to deal with in context like this.
Yeah. So where should we take it from here? What if you were? So you are working on a sequel of this movie?
Well, the thing is that as soon as the movie became huge, everybody, the amount of emails and Facebook messages that I received, Alexis, everybody in the world, at least the English-speaking world, seemed to be saying to me, Mr. Conolly, you've got to make another movie. You just have to. There's an awful lot of people who've put public comments on the best site at the moment where you can find my film, which is the Hidden Reality channel. And I'd like to give a little wave to whoever is running the Hidden Reality channel. It's got about 250,000 views on that particular website, on that particular channel, I should say. And on there's so many people saying, this is like the most important documentary ever made, but I want to see, everything since the last since 9/11. I want Mr. Conolly to make another film, and I want him to deal with, COVID and the lockdown, and I want to hear what he thinks about Brexit, and I want him to explain that. Yes, it needs to be done, but maybe I'll do this right here, Alexis, because there's something I need to go into. Forgive me if it seems like I'm hogging this broadcast a little bit, but this is important. It really is, because what I want your viewers to know, especially those who are coming to it for the first time, new people are joining the truth movement all the time. New people are waking up all the time, because the major difference that my work has made over the last sort of period of the last era is that it woke people up. I mean, the numbers of public comments where people said to me on the original version of my film, Mr. Conolly, I am awake now. Awake became the buzzword of the time in the period immediately after my movie was released. And the most basic effect that it had on ordinary day-to-day life was that it destroyed the whole notion of the Islamic terrorism thing.
Yes.
There was a up until my movie came out, people were swallowing that
Mm-hmm.
hook, line, and sinker. I used to hear people saying, "Oh, women in particular would go into stores and say, oh, did see a Muslim woman, and oh, has she got a bomb hidden? Is she not really pregnant? Has she got a bomb in her stomach?" Or you see how they planted the seed in people's minds. You'd get that all the time. And what the major effect that my work had was that all of a sudden people realized this is a trick. And I used to hear people on trains, in shopping malls, everywhere saying, "Oh, whenever I hear anything on the news about terrorism, I take that with a pinch of salt now."
Mm-hmm.
And I went to great lengths in interviews at the time to thank those people who made all these wonderful videos, which proved that all of those stupid things that we saw, which always involved either a truck or a bus, in Nice, there's been a lorry has run a load of people over and one thing. And when you looked at the video, there was no evidence of that whatsoever. There was plastic dummies lying that they'd placed on the ground. And in some cases, I think they were even using things like dead animals. It appeared to me, even though the video was bad, the Nice one, that there was a dead pig. Then they were saying this was a human body. There's all these crazy videos, that they were dressing up to try and prove that terrorism was happening. And all these wonderful people were looking through them and saying, well, I could take this to court and prove that this is a hoax. So bit by bit by bit, it broke it down and broke it down to the point where the establishment realized people aren't buying this anymore. They're not swallowing the terrorism thing anymore, and they gave up on that. I mean, how long is it since we've heard about ISIS? Yeah, where's Islamic State now? Why did they suddenly just pack up? They didn't. They never existed in the first place. Al Qaeda was just a ghost. So that was the effect that my work had up until recently. Now, when the whole Prince Andrew thing started, I tried to say to people, no, look, this lockdown thing, the COVID thing, it's just a distraction story. Brexit was a distraction story. Everything is a distraction story. The Premier League was created to be a distraction story, an ongoing distraction story. Everything is there to try and take your head away from what the elite are up to and the dirty things that they're up to. I mean, at the moment, all we hear about in this country, and it's probably the same way you are, is that there's a COVID crisis, there's a monkeypox crisis, there's a cost of living crisis. Everything is a crisis. So, as I say, in every broadcast, I was trying to get across to people, this is being done just to try and take your head away from what Prince Andrew has been up to. And I can't believe recently, or the effect that it's had just recently, just in the last few weeks. Everyone I've talked to and everywhere I've gone, everybody just seems to be saying, "Oh no, everything's a distraction story." All I hear is people saying to each other, could that be a distraction story? And the best example was these 2 hot days that we had. I don't know if Americans are aware of this, but we were told in Britain that we were about to have a record-breaking temperature that we'd never had before. We were going to go above 40 degrees, and that had never been recorded in Britain before. And on the morning that it was supposed to start, I met a woman while I was on my morning walk, and I said, "Oh, hello, madam. Do you think we're going to have this hot day thing?" And she said, "Oh, I'll bet it's just another distraction story."
Oh my God.
Oh my God. And I had the same thing over and over and over and over and over again from everybody who I talked to. And I thought, my God, some kind of penny has just suddenly dropped. And I think that the cumulative effect of what the things I've been putting on Facebook in particular, with people suddenly just getting sick to death of all this tripe about COVID and lockdowns and vaccines and all the rest of it, I think some kind of watershed moment has been reached. And it has, I don't want to say ended, but it's come to a head with this wonderful Australian senator. I hope he's wonderful. called Alex Antich. Now, I want people to know the pronunciation that I'm giving. I'm giving it as I am because there was a tennis player who was called Mario Antich, who was also Yugoslavian, and this man's father is Yugoslavian. It's spelled Antic, but I'm going to pronounce it Antich because I think that's the correct Yugoslavian pronunciation. It seems we may have finally an honest politician somewhere in the world. It's and I'm the first to be skeptical about that. If people are screaming down the the camera now saying, "Oh, come on, Mr. Gray, there's no way he could slip through the net," I would be the first one to agree. The first one to agree. But he's put a wonderful video on YouTube. It's only 4 minutes, everybody. Please watch this man and what he says. It's if you go to YouTube and put in Aussie Senator Alex Antich, Antic, lays out the grand plan. What he basically is saying is exactly the same thing I've been saying for ages. He just spells out exactly the same thing about the distraction, about the fact that, you know, if you dare, as you have, to be in any way anti-vaccine, and as Joseph Mercola has, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're the worst person of all, just because you want transparency. You're some kind of nutcase. And I couldn't believe it when I found this, because it was only last night. So could all of your listeners, all your viewers, all the people you know, please, everybody, write this down. It's Alex Antich, AlexAntic.com.au. He is an Australian senator. Please write to him and say, thank you for what you said. This is what we want to hear. If, Senator Antich, you really, really want to change the world as much as you seem to want to, could you please contact two men who are known in Australia as the Atlassians? I don't know if you've heard of these two men, Alexis. Have you heard of Scott Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brooks? Are those names familiar? They are two software developers who must be geniuses with software and the software they created. And I think that the last time I heard they had $25 billion as their personal fortune. They're people who have gone off the scale. And when I checked them out, they seem to be the two sweetest men you could ever imagine. They're both young fathers, got lovely young families. And they were even saying, oh, from now on, as Atlasia, their company, makes money, every $10th that we make, every time there's $10, $1, so it's going to be a huge amount of money, is going to go to help the poor, help the disabled, help every good cause there is. They seem to be, and I hope people don't mind me saying this, they seem to be wonderful people. And I've tried to get in touch with them, and I've been prevented from doing so. Every email has, nothing's come back. Every phone call, I can't get through. I even sent a letter, and the letter was held up by the customs. There's obviously something going on there. So the thing is, if Senator Antich really wants to make a difference, he needs to see my movie. Please, yourself, tell him this. Please write to him and say, Senator, I've just seen this film. You need to help this man. Because if my movie, as everybody has been saying, everybody has said, everyone in the world needs to see this. And if everybody in the world could see it in their own language, in Chinese, Arabic, French, Italian, German, whatever, it would push the world into a state where they would see, the whole world would see, the divide and rule contract that controls the world. Every Arab who's been told all his life, oh, your problem is the Jew, would see, no, it isn't. It's the rich man. Every black man who's ever been told, your problem is white men, he would be able to see, no, it isn't. It's the rich man. Every woman who's ever been told, your problem is men, would be able to see, no, it's the rich man. There would be a collective feeling, which exists now to a huge extent in the English-speaking world, all over the globe. And that could, and I think eventually would, do the most important thing of all. It would rid us of this oligarch class, which is everybody's problem. They are your problem. They are Senator Antич's problem. They're Joseph Mercola's problem. I want to give this same message to Joseph Mercola as well, because I didn't realize before I met you that he's a very rich man, and he could pay for it as well. Basically, somebody needs to distribute my movie to those who haven't seen it. That might produce the next watershed moment, and then we really might win this battle against tyranny. And thank you for allowing me to say all of that, all in one go.
All right, so some people are getting a little confused. One person in our chat has said, I don't understand what this is about. So we're here with Francis Richard Conolly, who is the man behind the movie JFK to 9/11, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. And we began this broadcast by excerpting a very small piece of this 3.5-hour movie that talks about the Nazi history of the corporation that became Bayer and then that merged with Monsanto. So this is directly related to our Millions Against Monsanto campaign. And Carrie Ann Johnson says, it is incredulous to me that corporations who literally were responsible for dreaming up and building Auschwitz are currently in control of our food supply. They've bullied farmers and destroyed generations of seed-saving equipment. They spray pesticides that they know will kill pollinators and own companies like Biologics, which genetically modify bees with an obvious goal of gaining control over pollinators such that they can choose which foods those bees pollinate. So these corporations are currently responsible for the majority of our food supply, and they have intimate and direct connections with the creation of Auschwitz and bear huge responsibility for the genocide of people during the Holocaust. And that is exactly what Francis Richard Conolly's movie, A Rich Man's Trick, it tells us. And so, this is a part of, I'd like to pitch the series that this conversation is part of. If you started from the beginning, you saw that the title was The Secret Military History of Monsanto. And of course, we include Bayer in that as well, now that Monsanto has merged with Bayer. But Francis, I want to tell you a little story and see if you know anything about this. I'm sure you seem to be a very widely read person. I was looking into so Monsanto, I was reading a book about the origin of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And it's by Annie Jacobson, and I think it's called The Pentagon's Brain. And there's just this little bit in this book about Monsanto that says that Monsanto was one of the corporations that lobbied the federal government for DARPA, which is basically just a whole lot of money coming from the Pentagon budget that corporations can use to develop new technologies. And so I had always, and this was, back in the 1950s, I suppose, when DARPA was created. And she didn't really, Annie Jacobson in her book, The Pentagon's Brain, didn't really elaborate on this much, but I've come across since then little pieces of information about how Monsanto was involved in the military. And of course, once we get to the Vietnam War, we know that Monsanto was one of the companies that manufactured Agent Orange. And then now recently we've seen, once Monsanto started doing the genetic engineering technology to make GMOs resistant to herbicide, we've seen that they started with glyphosate, which is a known carcinogen, but then they moved backwards to the deadly herbicides that they used to make Agent Orange, like 2,4-D, for instance. And so now, because, of course, we have this pesticide treadmill and these genes that the weeds can take up, so they build up a natural resistance to the herbicide, but then they can also get the genetics from the genetically modified crops, and through the soil microorganisms, trade genes with the crops that they live next to for decades. And eventually they can take on those traits that allow them to be resistant to herbicides. So obviously a huge problem, taking us backwards to perhaps even more deadly herbicides, although glyphosate is certainly one of the worst now that we know that it is linked to cancer, but also that it destroys our healthy gut bacteria, which becomes the root of all sorts of problems with disease in our immune system.
Yeah.
So to wrap this up, so we know that that's a serious piece of Monsanto history, the whole Vietnam War era. But this period between the time that they start asking the Pentagon for money and they end up producing chemical weapons used in the Vietnam War, that's a somewhat unknown piece of history. But I've learned recently that Monsanto was involved in tests for the distribution of biological weapons. And the Washington Post reported, I believe, in the late 1970s or early 80s, that there were some, like nearly 300 tests on American cities where Monsanto was one of the contractors, and they were doing dispersal tests. And what they said they used was a bacteria very similar to anthrax. They don't claim to have used anthrax, but they used something similar to it. I'm not exactly sure how similar, but in one of the well-known studies, they sprayed the whole city of San Francisco with this bacteria. And some people are known to have died from this. And of course, if you didn't know your city was sprayed with a bacteria, how would you have known that if someone you knew died, it happened to be related? So there are probably many more deaths than are documented, but there are documented deaths related with this program. And this was one of the early projects of Fort Detrick. So that's just a little bit of history I've come across recently. Is this something that you've had an opportunity?
There's something I should immediately add to that, Alexis, because this is one of the reasons why I'm so amazed that your countrymen haven't taken things into their own hands. You see, our mainstream media here, I mean, the BBC, I remember I've said this many times in many interviews. The BBC used to be the greatest broadcaster in the world during the 70s. There's quite a few Americans who've interviewed me who acknowledged the fact that, the BBC documentaries and ITV documentaries were, they had a prestige. If you want a great documentary film made, you go to the British and whatnot, and that's completely gone now. And the reason that it's gone was that once this whole thing about the American government attacking their own people started to get found out, they no longer wanted BBC journalists of quality looking into anything. And a classic example was the 2001 anthrax attack.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much any of your viewers ever looked into this, or if they ever heard about this documentary. It was on BBC Two, and I used to have a copy of it, which strangely disappeared, but I won't go into that. But basically, the detective who was given the job of finding out who was responsible had no leads, but he said, okay, let's go to the place where we know it was posted and sort of go backwards from there. And they were even investigating the stamps and even the paper that see if they could find an origin. I'll cut this as short as I can, but basically, very good detective work led him to a laboratory, which I think was in Maryland. Please don't give me any letters about this, everybody. I get enough hate mail.
I can help you out. I know the story. So it's Fort Detrick in Maryland. I live in Maryland, so I'm familiar with it.
Well, the thing was, I think I got that right. The thing was that when the detective started asking questions about the anthrax strain itself, and he started saying, look, I've got to try and find out where in the Middle East this was made and who had the scientific capability to create it. And he was laughed at. And he said, well, what's the big joke? And they said, well, look under this microscope and look at this and look at this. There is no one, absolutely no one in the Middle East. There's no one in the whole of Asia who's got the quality control required to produce an anthrax grade of this level. That's not possible. And he said, well, how can I narrow this down then? It must have been produced somewhere. Where in the world could this have been produced? And he was then told, well, the only place in the world where this could have been made was here. And he said, well, you're telling me it came out of this government laboratory? And they said there was, because of the quality of it, there was nowhere else that it could have been made. So then it was perfectly obvious that it must have been a CIA operation similar to the one that you've just told your viewers about that happened in San Francisco.
Mhm.
And as soon as then, he'd gone up like this and up like this and up like this. And once he'd got to the ceiling, which was the federal government, he wasn't allowed to go any further. He wasn't allowed to find out exactly who was responsible. The whole thing stalled then. Oh, it's a matter of national security. And the thing was, I was very annoyed at myself. But I mean, you can imagine, having seen my film, what my notebooks are like.
Oh,
Alexis.
I bet. Yeah.
The amount of information that I have got stored here
Yeah.
is ridiculous. And I don't have a secretary. I've never had any help of any kind whatsoever. And I cannot find, but I will tell your viewers about this anyway. And I recorded this because apparently it is written down. Apparently you could go and look in the National Archives and find that in, I think it was Florida in the 50s, the first time, and I don't know if it involved Monsanto, but it probably did involve Bayer, that they basically just fired smallpox into the air. See what that could do to a population in terms of a terrorist attack.
Oh, I think I know where this happened, because my husband's family lived in this spot. It's called Avon Park. There was a military base at Avon Park, and I don't know the specific instance that you're talking about with smallpox, but in the things that I was reading recently, Avon Park was mentioned as one of the test sites for these aerial biological weapons tests. And yeah, right there.
So, Alexis, you've got a situation where Americans are living in a country where their own government are using them as guinea pigs, where their own government are murdering them biologically, where their own government are, because everybody knows now that with 9/11, their own government are, bringing down huge buildings, giving people diseases of the lungs in New York, and yet you do nothing about it. I mean, it is beyond me. If I do not believe for 1 second that if these kinds of things, I mean, certainly if these kinds of things had been done to the Dutch, the government would fall just like that. In Britain, less so, but certainly I think in Holland or Germany, if the government ever tried anything like that, the revolution would break out the next day, because they have seen it, you see. They saw the Second World War. They saw what Nazi methods and Nazi attitudes could do to a population. So they just wouldn't stand for it. And that is why, the elites know this. That's why it hasn't happened to them. But, you and I have got the absolute right to say to the American people right here, right now, if you don't do something about it and they kill you or they kill your child, well, don't come crying to Alexis or to Mr. Conolly, because we told you so. We tried to tell you. Why don't you do something about your government?
Well, that's a tough one. That's a challenging one. But I do like the Green Party here in the United States. We have candidates running for office statewide with the Green Party this year that I think are really good. So there are political solutions. I think it's better, no matter how dispirited you get, I think it's better to participate than not participate. And I think that...
Alexis, I agree, but let me ask you something. How do you know that the people in the Green Party are not CIA agents? If I was to ask you now to prove to me that anybody who you think is doing good things is not working for some secret intelligence agency, or is not working for some Freemason or Skull and Bones people, that is the problem. That is why I keep saying to people that until the day that we all collectively are in a position where everybody understands that everything is a hoax, that everything is a distraction story, and that absolutely anybody who's basically talking to you from the mainstream media, that any one of them, I mean, Tucker Carlson could be CIA, any of these, people.
I think I heard a story that Tucker Carlson volunteered to join the CIA and they didn't give him a job.
Oh, really?
He tried.
Oh,
He tried, but he could only get hired by the media, by Fox
oh.
News.
Well,
Well,
just
I don't know.
best friends.
This is one of the age-old conversations that we have in activist circles, what the best thing to do is. But I know what for sure a very good thing to do is to grow food organically and share it with your community and support the people who are doing that. Because there are some things that are real. Our health, your individual health and your family's health and the health of your community is real. And the farming practices and the lifestyle that creates that health are real. So don't get dispirited. The answer is always the same. Organic agriculture run by small scale independent farmers. And yeah, I know it's hard not to go to those depths. And we have Luna Soul saying the government in the United States is completely corrupt and out of control. The participation level that we need to correct these kinds of subversive moves against us is a revolutionary level, seriously. And to be honest, it's not at all a laughable matter. So of course not. I don't make light of it, but I believe very strongly in peaceful change. I think that one of the huge downfalls that can happen to any activist movement is to lose the spirit of people like Martin Luther King, who really believed that most of us are good, most of us are not connected with the evil elite, and that we can band together to do good things nonviolently in our culture. And we're all part of the organic movement. And every day that we buy direct from an independent farmer, work on a farm, create a farm, be part of that, we are creating the world that sustains life and the world that we want to live in. So I'm hopeful that there really is always something you can do, and it might not be voting for the Green Party candidate if you don't think that's the strategy. That's just one piece of the activism that I'm involved in this year. But I think that there's always hope, and we can't give up, and we can't get so dispirited that we feel like, a revolution, which normally suggests violence, is the only way.
Well, I think, Alexis, because I've said it before in other interviews, that people would want me to repeat here, that I do think that perhaps the world being the way that it is now, especially the fact that it's becoming more and more just one place, and that the obvious divisions between cultures that used to exist, are not so obvious anymore. I think it's possible that the revolution that the world needs could be achieved peacefully. But still, I don't want any of your viewers, any of the people who you're involved with the Organic Consumers Association, all I can say is never underestimate, ever, just how dirty these people are. And the way that everybody who wants a revolution needs to learn to think is to put themselves in the position of the elite. They need to put themselves in the position of Prince Andrew's friends. Need to try to think, what's it been like for them to be people who've murdered children, raped children, molested children, murdered other people. I'm perfectly certain that for much of the 60s, 70s, 80s, that they were going around the world having human hunting parties where they would, kidnap a black man and send him out into the African bush and then go after him with, night sights and want to shoot him just for fun. They've been doing that kind of thing. These people are the devil incarnate. They truly are the devil on earth. And, there's nothing that they won't stoop to hang on to power, because power is all they've got. If they lose their power, and decent people like you and I, and these wonderful people who've been, Carrie Ann Johnson, who's been sending us this interesting information during this broadcast, if the decent people take over then everything they've been doing will be exposed. And if everything they've been up to, I mean, people, one of the reasons I think that this sudden watershed moment has occurred, where people are suddenly all saying together, oh, everything's just a distraction story. Mr. Conolly's right. I think one of the reasons is that they've known all along that there's how many movie stars, movie producers, top military men, top policemen were involved with the child sex abuse network that Prince Andrew has been caught in. The top people have obviously all been involved in it, and we still don't know their names, and we still don't know to what extent, and everybody wants to know. If the decent people ever take over, that's all going to be exposed. What Ghislaine Maxwell really did, who she did it with, for how long, etc. That's all going to come out, and they're desperate to keep that under wraps. This is why I've been saying to people that if it ever does come down to a simple choice between, I don't know, starting a nuclear war, but have a nuclear accident, say, well, what they'll call an accident, or what they'll call an aggressive moment from North Korea, or something where they fired a missile at Mississippi. It won't hit New York. It won't hit Los Angeles, and it certainly won't hit London. But some kind of craziness like that, I do believe is possible, because there's nothing that these people won't stop at to hang on to power. So all of the people who want to see this revolution happen, they need to put themselves in the position and think, what is it like to be in the position of people who've got truly hundreds of billions. Money means nothing to them. They can buy 100 jets if they want to. People who've got slaves working for them, have orgies every day. If you're in that situation and you're listening to me, to you, to this whole world of millions of people who might tear you apart if they could only find out the truth about what you're doing, how are you going to behave? You're going to be pretty crazy, and you're going to be pretty selfish. So, I would say, yes, I would agree with you. We have to be hopeful. I agree with you that Martin Luther King's example and Gandhi's example could be the way, but also be aware, Alexis, that your goodness, because you're such a decent lady, could be used against you by fascists. There's nothing that they like more than what George Orwell called political quietism. And George Orwell did say, these people can stand moral force until the cows come home. The thing they fear is physical force. Never forget that.
All right, so let's go back to the anthrax story, because you started it, and I've got something to share, because I've focused a lot on that over the last couple of years, looking into the anthrax story. So there was a wonderful researcher, Barbara Hatch Rosenberg. I don't know if you came across any of her work researching the origins of the anthrax attacks. Barbara Hatch Rosenberg. Right. And she had a few co-authors whose names I'm not remembering at the moment, but they determined, based on the FBI analysis that you described of the anthrax that was used in the 2001 attacks, that it was silicon encapsulated. So essentially, they took the tiny little pieces, nanoscale probably, pieces of bacteria, and coated them in glass. And then once they were coated in glass, if you had an envelope with a teaspoon or so of it, but ripped open the envelope, the electrostatic charge of the glass rubbing against each other would cause it to poof into the air. And that's what happened in the Hart office building, the Senate Hart office building. And I remember at the time I had friends who were working on Capitol Hill, and the building had to be shut down. It's a great big building. I guess it's about 4 or 5 stories, and it has a huge atrium in the middle. It's all open. So it's like, when, anything like that, these little anthrax bomblets opened, it created a contamination situation that took a long time to correct. So you are correct that these silicone encapsulated anthrax spores were very unique. had been developed by the federal government under contracts with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. And it's pretty clear who had those contracts. Now, this is something, I found Barbara Hatch Rosenberg's most recent article, which I think is 2012 or 2013, where she lays all this evidence out that the FBI had collected. And then she starts talking about these DARPA contracts, because those were a matter of the public record, to create silicone encapsulated anthrax after they had created genetically engineered anthrax. So, they worked on it for a long time. And the world-renowned expert on genetically engineering anthrax was Ken Alibek, a Russian scientist who defected to the United States and was brought right into the US biological weapons program. So he was definitely involved. He had a contract through DARPA to microencapsulate the anthrax, and he worked at Battelle. So we know some of the corporations involved as well. Battelle is a military contractor who had these contracts. So Ken Alibek was working directly for Battelle on anthrax contracts right before 9/11. We're talking about 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. And his partner was Charles Bailey. So Charles Bailey and Ken Alibek had this DARPA contract to make the attack anthrax. And Charles Bailey had been a commander at Fort Detrick. And then the third person that I'm fairly certain was involved is David Franz. And he was a subcontractor under Charles Bailey and Ken Alibek's Battelle contract. They had a subcontract that he had, and he worked for Southern Research Institute, which is a small outfit in Frederick for people like David Franz, who was also a former commander of Fort Detrick, to work. And, once they retire from the military, then they can get government contracts and make a little bit more money. And so it's very clear, what the anthrax was like, because we have the FBI analysis and we know we have the government contracts, and then we know who were the leads on those government contracts. So I'm fairly certain that Ken Alibek, Charles Bailey, and David Franz are alive today. And it's not too late to bring folks like that to justice. And I feel that, and corporations like Battelle, I guess then eventually what it comes down to is like, okay, so they made the anthrax, and probably the CIA was the outfit that organized the attacks, and they were very clever with it. They had multiple patsies lined up. Anybody who lived through this period in the United States would probably recognize the name of Stephen Hatfill. He was a Fort Detrick scientist who was named as a person of interest in the anthrax attacks, and that dragged out for many years. And then he was able to sue the federal government and get millions of dollars. So he was likely involved in the CIA conspiracy, but he was hung out to dry. And as a favor, for that, they paid him off through the court system, no less. So, he's still alive. All of these people are still there. So it's a pretty big network of people who are involved. But of course, you have to take that to the people who actually planned it, because I suppose people like Stephen Hatfill, David Franz, Charles Bailey, Ken Alibek, they each had a little bit, a piece of it, but they probably weren't the masterminds of the situation. And I guess we understand that in these clever CIA operations, they have multiple cover stories. It's like peeling an onion.
I hope that when this is over, that your own fans, if you want to put it that way, check out what it says on Wikipedia about this whole anthrax attack, because the difference between what you've just explained in terms of the truth and what it says in the Wikipedia report could not be further apart. And I hope that people see in that how these people operate on a day-to-day basis, and that they will be able to see that the lies that you get in the, let's say, the official version of the anthrax attack, that those kinds of lies, we see them in our media now every day about everything. They've got an entire army of people who are writing filth, writing lies, and more lies, inventing characters, inventing situations which are totally spurious every single day to throw us off the scent. And I'm very, very grateful for what you've just told me there, because I may well use what you've just told me there later in my own work. You've obviously done some fantastic research there, and fantastic.
Yeah, Whitney Webb did a lot of good research on people involved in anthrax. So she has her Dark Winter series about Robert Cadlick, because Robert Cadlick, he was right there in the Trump administration, and yeah, so there all of these people who are likely involved in 2001 anthrax are still running around. I think after Robert Cadlick was disgraced during the Trump administration because he was caught yet again providing government money to a favored corporation that he had worked with through the revolving door, being in government, going to the private corporation. So he was working essentially for Emergent Biosolutions while he was in the Trump administration. And the Washington Post wrote all about it after Whitney Webb broke the story. They didn't credit her, but they did tell the story. And then nothing happened. There were a series of articles in the Washington Post. And now, last time I heard, Robert Cadlick, in charge of this scandal, millions of dollars going to this corporation because of his dirty work. He's now working for a committee in the US Congress. So yeah, these people stick around, but I think that they, they are shameable. And, there was a good question here. How do we bring them to justice in the very system that houses and supports them? Well, the good thing about any system is it's not monolithic. And there are people who are independent and not sold out. And we do have opportunities to access the legal system. And I think that what the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, what they have done on anthrax and on the towers and Building 7 is a fantastic model for addressing any of these conspiracies that were launched from our own governments with our own money for the sake of corporations that don't give a hoot about whether we live or die. And so I encourage everyone to go to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. They have at the top of their website, there is their anthrax petition. So if you're interested in the story that I just told, you can read their telling of the story, which is very similar. They've collected all of the evidence that the government had about the anthrax attacks. Plus, there was someone who did get justice. The widow of the woman whose husband was the first to die of anthrax. He worked for the National Enquirer, I believe, in Florida, and they were the first news outlet hit with an anthrax letter. And he died from exposure to anthrax. And so she sued the federal government, and she didn't, go guns blazing with the idea that she knew who had done it. She had a very simple legal claim, very good attorney. And her legal claim was the US government was in possession of this anthrax. And somehow it made it to Florida and killed my husband. So at the very least, you all were responsible for making sure that anthrax didn't get out of your laboratories and kill anyone. And you failed. And she won that lawsuit. And there was
Do you know her name, Alexis?
I don't, but it's in the petition. So if you go to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and read their anthrax petition, you'll get the story. And another really good retelling of this whole saga, Robbie Martin at Media Roots Radio, he recently did a whole series. He does very long podcasts. You'd like him, Francis, because his podcasts are each about the same length as your movie, Everything is a Chance Trick. Like he can go 3 hours just telling the anthrax story. Very good podcast, very well produced, with a lot of original audio and great music. So Robbie Martin at Media Roots Radio is really good on anthrax. And of course, to draw it back to the topic that brought everybody here today, it started with companies like Monsanto, working for the military in the early days of the biological weapons program, practicing on US cities. Oh, there's another one that I wanted to ask you if you knew about, Francis. Um, so I read an article recently about the history of US experimentation on anthrax. And the story was that the United States was prepared to use anthrax in World War II, but they didn't get the opportunity. They had it all mapped out. They had a list of German cities that they wanted to attack with anthrax, and it didn't happen. And after the war, the Allies decided to hit a very small British island with anthrax. And as of today, I believe that that island is still uninhabitable. It's just terribly contaminated with anthrax. And it was just a little agricultural island. There were humans living there that I believe were the victims of these, of, you know, you can't exactly call that, you have to call it an attack. You can't call it an experiment when there are live human subjects. Were you aware of this? I don't remember the name of the island, but
Well, that was my question, because I'd heard a rumor like this. I had heard this rumor, and it would, as with so many things that I've tried to research. I think that they've got some kind of special team in
yes.
the CIA, which tries to make sure that if something is really, really serious, that if you follow it, you hit a dead end, and
Right.
the trail goes cold. And you know, in the process of putting together my movie, there were many things that I heard about British corporations that were linked to American corporations, and the trail went cold. Things that were linked to the Kennedy assassination. And when I was looking into that particular thing, yes, I did hear a rumor like this, but I never could find out the name of the island. I mean, has that just slipped your memory, or did you just never know?
Oh no, it's in, I'm currently writing on this subject, and it's in an article that I'm using as a reference. So I can send it to you. And
I would like to know that.
yeah, so I have a series called The Gain of Function Hall of Shame. And so it's about the US biological weapons program, which has euphemistically been called gain of function research recently, but it really is just biological weapons. And I started looking into it in 2000, and I've written a series of articles on this, and it caused me to go back and examine this biological weapons history, which is pretty well pretty well hit. Okay, so we've got Elizabeth Haggerty Cessna in the chat. She says Grenard Island, Gruinard Island, fire on island used for anthrax experiments. So there we are. Did you get the spelling?
No, go to me again, please.
Gruinard Island.
Do you know? Could she say where this is?
I think it's in Scotland, as I recall.
Because you're going to get all kinds of smart asses saying there's the island of Jura.
Well, she's got receipts here. Oh, actually, Corey is on it. So my producer, Corey Melvey, he's in the chat as Organic Consumers Association and Millions Against Monsanto by organicconsumers.org. And he has put in a link to a BBC documentary. So it's definitely in Scotland, and the BBC has documented it. So I guess
I'm trying to think. You see, it's Scottish and Welsh and so much else around these funny islands where I live. You'd be amazed at how. I'll give you an example. Oh, if you could imagine this, it's TAOSCHIECH, I think. Now, if your viewers could put that in their heads and try to imagine how they would try to pronounce something as stupid as that, but in Ireland, it's just Tisac. It's a political party, the TSAC party. So I'm wondering how that word is pronounced. But this is as fascinating for me, Alexis. I'm so glad you brought this up, as I'm sure it is for your viewers. We're really learning something here, because if there was this kind of outrage, and the British themselves have never ever got to know about it, would you know which year this was?
Well, let's see. So Corey, my producer, has put some information in the chat for me. It says, "The Mystery of Anthrax Island and the Seeds of Death. For decades, Grenard," and that's Gruinard Island, off the northwest coast of Scotland, was too dangerous to allow public access. It was known as Anthrax Island after it was contaminated during World War II by scientists carrying out germ warfare experiments. Anthrax is a lethal bacteria, especially when inhaled, and it proves fatal in almost all cases, even with medical treatment. The secret wartime experiments left the tiny island uninhabitable for decades, until in 1981, a group known as the Dark Harvest Commandos launched a move to focus attention on the deadly contamination. So that's a crazy story. And that reminds me, speaking of Monsanto and Bayer and anthrax, I forgot to mention the most important story related to the military history of Monsanto, which is that Bayer had the exclusive Food and Drug Administration approval for a drug to treat inhalation anthrax. Because if you get anthrax in nature, so it does exist in nature, it's in the soil, and it ends up on the pelts of animals, and it was commonly known as a wool worker's disease. So if you're working wool or leather, I suppose, you could get anthrax on your hands or arms, and it was cutaneous anthrax. It turns up as skin lesions, and it's still extremely deadly, but it's not quite as deadly. You might be able to be treated by antibiotics, but it's much more deadly when it's inhaled, and it's rarely ever inhaled in nature. I guess the only other situation where you might plausibly create inhalation anthrax naturally, but I'm not sure that this is the truth or a trick, because I have another story about this that makes me think it's a trick. But imagine you were putting wool through a textile factory, and if the wool were contaminated with anthrax, you might create something that could be inhaled through the manufacture of a woolen textile contaminated with anthrax. But I think that might be a cover story for the weaponization of anthrax. So in nature, I believe it is almost exclusively a skin disease. So in the year before 9/11, before the anthrax attacks, Bayer got the exclusive rights to treat inhalation anthrax with a drug called Cipro. And Cipro, of course, became an important part of the 9/11 story, because many people reported that the White House started taking Cipro right before 9/11. And the anthrax attacks may have been launched around the time of 9/11, but they didn't even appear in the news for a few weeks later. But the White House, Dick Cheney, George Bush, etc., they were already taking Cipro. And I remember Cipro was what everybody who worked on Capitol Hill had to take. And it is a horrible pharmaceutical. It has terrible side effects. You feel like you're going to die. You feel like you get sick when you take it. But everyone was told that you could die of anthrax if you don't take Cipro. And the only drug on the market to treat inhalation anthrax was Bayer's Cipro.
I wonder if it ruined their health. I wonder if it
Cipro.
made...
Yeah.
I wonder if the Cipro made George Bush die quicker than he otherwise would have done. I honestly, my head is spinning now with this information.
Oh,
Alexis,
we're talking about the younger George Bush. Isn't he still alive?
Sorry, what? No. Well, yeah.
I don't think the elder George Bush was.
No, he was. Yeah, he was. No, he was.
He
Yeah,
probably knew better than to take the Cipro. And who knows if that story that we're told about everybody taking Cipro was more designed to get us to take it.
Yeah.
Like why? Yeah. So who knows? Who knows?
I like the way you're thinking. Well, good, because this is what I'm trying to get across to people, Alexis, is that we can no longer trust any government in the entire world with anything. The only thing they're giving us these days is disinformation and fake news. And I wonder every day, the same thought is there in my head. Everything comes to a head eventually. I just cannot wait to see, and I hope I get to see it, how this is going to come to a head, and how the spot is finally going to burst, because everybody, as I've said in this broadcast, has been telling me that they've had enough, and that they're not going to take this anymore with this fake news thing and the distraction stories. But I do think also that when people actually think about it, they think, well, what can we do about this? How can we stop the mainstream media? How can we stop all of this tyranny? I mean, the Alex Belfield trial that I wrote about on Facebook recently is a classic example of where we are now. I mean, you have a man there, all he was doing was what we're doing. He was just making YouTube videos about people who he felt were the agents of the government and the agents of the fascists in the mainstream media, people who were, giving out disinformation and whatnot. And he was simply, okay, he was barracking them, but he has a right to do that. I mean, the basis of Western democracy is that you are allowed to comment upon and analyze and criticize any public figure. That's the basis of our democracy. And that is all he was doing. He wasn't approaching anybody. He wasn't threatening, intimidating anyone. And yet that man, Alex Belfield, if your American viewers aren't aware of him, he's got his own website. He's got his own channel. They've put him into Nottingham Crown Court, and somehow he's been found guilty of stalking. It is the most ludicrous trial, and the most ludicrous jury, judge, verdict you could ever imagine. It is perfectly. George Orwell would say, "This is what I was trying to warn people about. That the day would come that we would have a dystopia where any attempt to find the truth or tell the truth would be registered as a crime." And so therefore, you and I right now are criminals, and everybody who's watching us, and listening to us, is equally a criminal if they're interested in what we're doing. Is that the future that we want? This is the thing that everybody you're involved with has got to ask themselves. And this is why, when anybody like Alex Antich appears, we've got to support him. But as I say, I don't think there's any way that we're going to resolve this whole problem of this tyranny and this corporate fascism that we're living under now, just through the political system that's in place. It's going to have to come from the public finally saying, no, enough's enough. We're going to tear down this parliament. We're going to, tear down the White House. We're going to tear down the system, and build another one. Unless we start with a clean sheet, I don't see, the kind of people who you've been talking about who were involved in the anthrax attack ever facing justice, because the entire system is corrupt.
I want to tell you one more anthrax story, but before we do that, someone has asked, Francis, how does someone connect with you on Facebook? Well, that's how I found Francis. I just messaged him on Facebook. All you have to do is look for Francis Richard Conolly, spell his last name correctly, Conolly. And
the thing is,
you'll find him right there. You can make friends with Francis.
People have got to understand that the establishment do not want me to be supported, to be helped. They don't want me to feel encouraged. They don't want me, to be anything other than isolated. I've no doubt that thousands of people have tried to get in touch with me and haven't been able to. Now that I've been on your show, if you don't mind, maybe they could do it, through OCA. Anybody who is really desperate to get in touch with me, it's probably just as well to write to Scott Armstrong, who has his own channel. He used to be one of the Truthzillas, along with his friend Ed and Megan McKinley. You could probably get in touch with me through them as well. But I appreciate the kind of problems that getting in touch with me can create. So try Facebook first. If that doesn't work, try Scott Armstrong or somebody like Justin Stellman. Oh hell, have you frozen up? Oh, we got a technical problem. As soon as I try to tell people how to get in touch with me. It's the just give it a second.
Alexis seems to have cut out. I'm sure she'll come back here soon.
My friend, how do you pronounce your first name?
Corey.
Corey. I thought Corey was spelled Corey. Alexis, hello. Oh, Dr. Spook, thank you very much if you can hear me. Appreciate that. Dr. Spook. We've got a technical problem, folks. We've lost Alexis. Greenard Island. Nothing about big money should be a surprise. Monsanto's chemical farming methods are this era's case in point. They don't care about human life. Well said, Dave Lee. That is totally correct. That's the oligarchs for you. Fascinating. I'm sorry it cut out. So am I. I'd like to hear a lot more. Where's Alexis gone? I am so curious about Grenada Island, northwest of Scotland. Wow. Lunar Sol. I've heard Lunar Sol from something. The one thing that I have come across that is a completely peaceful response is the use of the Maharishi effect. It's been studied for decades now. If we can gather 10% of the population in any given area and apply a focused, intentional meditation to the experience we want to change, then we can achieve the results we need to secure the health and safety of the people. Lunar Sol, I would never be so ignorant as to close my mind to anything. But I'd love to see people try that while they were under fire, because that's the kind of thing that would happen. Corey, can you hear me?
I can indeed. I'm trying to get a hold of Alexis, but she's also not responding to text messages. I may give it a couple more tries here.
She's probably just got sick to death of looking at me. Dr. Spook, I really appreciate what you're saying. You've no idea how much. Thank you for the encouragement. If I ever get to make another movie, I'll remember that. Ooh, this is frustrating.
Yes, no answer on her phone either. I'm not sure what's happened.
You know, Corey, this doesn't surprise me. It may well be nefarious forces doing this. I've had this before. I had this in my very first interview on the Richie Allen show, and Richie Allen has had this many times. You know, maybe they think that she was about to share something that they do not want shared with the public. You know, maybe they know that she knows something that she's about to divulge that they do not want divulged. This happening right now does not surprise me in the least. This is the world we live in. It's most frustrating, but they're in control of the internet. You see, this is it's their baby.
Perhaps there's something else you could talk about. What else had you and Alexis wanted to go over today?
Well, actually, Corey, the only thing, and I hope you don't mind it, is that I think you could see when I was trying to get across what I need to get across to the Australian senator and to Joseph Mercola. It is so hard for me to communicate to men who have money. I'll be that bland about it. Why it's important to support my work. It's very difficult in the first place to make people realize how much my work has changed the world. That you know, Mercola and Antich may not be aware that you know, the whole thing with the phony terrorism has disappeared largely because of my film. They may not be aware of that. And, you know, because every man has his own agenda and his own vision of things, which, you know, is inevitable, they probably don't realize how much more my work could change the world if it was supported. And that is why so far nobody with wealth, and I've got to say, they don't realize that this is why wealth itself is so controlled. They don't realize. I mean, maybe Senator Anchich, bearing in mind what he said in his speech, maybe he has realized now. I'm not sure, but this is why anybody, a pop star, a rock star, an actor, a movie producer, anybody who winds up with a really big chunk of money, basically into the millions. This is why the oligarchs always try to compromise them in some way. I mean, what way doesn't matter, but usually they do it through sex with children, and that this is why they try to get them in their pockets, because they don't want ever a pop star or movie star or a film director like Steven Spielberg or something like that to support a man like me and bring out the truth about the super rich. So I'm very, very grateful that I've had this opportunity to try and explain this, because trying to do it in an email, especially when you're writing to men who get hundreds of emails every day, you know, it's so difficult trying to get it across. I wind up having to write reams and reams and reams, and even then it's very difficult to get across. So I'm very grateful, especially at this moment, Corey, that that Alexis has given me the chance to say all of this. Personally, I'd love to get her back to say more about this whole anthrax thing, because I'm sure that the viewers want to hear more about it, and I would love to hear more about this myself, because it's the kind of thing at the moment that I might just be able to, well, perhaps not me, but maybe somebody else could get this to be a mainstream media story, and to hit the public with. It's not impossible, because this is a very small island, and it's the kind of thing at the moment that might resonate with the public. So I would love to hear. I'm not even sure how this Grunard is pronounced, and I have not heard of this island. And the mere fact that I've not heard of it should tell you something, me especially.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know more about this this place.
Well, I have heard from Alexis. Her computer apparently decided that was a good moment to restart. So she's coming back around. Hopefully she'll be back here soon. So that hopefully she's on her way.
Well, I know she's got we're only going to have about another 18 minutes, I think, because she's got a meeting, she told me, at 4 o'clock your time. So yeah, I hope she can come back and tell me more about this. That would be great.
In case she doesn't come back, are there any other things that you'd really like folks to know about?
The problem I have with interviews nowadays, Corey, is that I've been asked. I mean, like the last interview that I did, which went out on YouTube, that was was really extensive, was with Tim Gaither, the comedian Tim Gaither, and he did a great job. He asked me about all the things that people do tend to ask me, and it was very comprehensive. So anybody who's frustrated because certain questions haven't been asked, I would tell them I would suggest they go to that interview, because it's a 3-hour long interview, and as I say, he covered just about everything. It's rather strange for me to find myself in a position where I've got to think of questions to ask myself. Is there anything that you, Corey, while I'm here, would like to know?
Well, I was just going through your movie, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick, right?
Yeah.
And it is very fascinating. I didn't get through the whole thing yet. I plan on doing it. But those deep connections that happened with how the different corporations were split up after the war and turned into agricultural chemical companies. How did that happen? What was the imperative behind that switch? Why was that the right direction?
Oh, it's always a matter of smoke and mirrors, Corey. Always. Well, whatever the rich do, it's always to hide what they've been up to. Wherever you get a breakup of a company, or wherever you get a merger, or what they do at the very highest level is always a matter of muddying the waters so that you can't find out or figure out what they're really up to. So bear that in mind, that whenever you're looking into these things yourself and want to research it yourself, you'll always find connections between the worst people. And we have Alexis back. Hello, Alexis. What happened?
Hi, my phone, I'm joining on my phone, but my computer went kaput.
Well,
not exactly sure what happened.
I've just been explaining to Corey that I'm not surprised, because this kind of thing has happened to me before. And I think it's possible that you were just about to tell the world something that the dirty people don't want you to tell the world. So I don't want to interrupt you. If there was something important that you still had to say, please say it.
Oh, no, not at all. I think what we were doing when I lost connection was you were telling people how they can get in touch with you.
Oh, well, as you told them, you did manage to find me on Facebook. I'm surprised that a woman of your influence, and because you do have a bit of power being the political director of the Organic Consumers Association, there's a hell of a lot of people. I mean, I understand there's like 95 million followers of what you do in the United States alone. So I'm actually surprised that they allowed you. Maybe that tells us something about how things are changing. Because one thing that actually gives me hope, Alexis, is that, the big problem that the tyrants always have is traitors. That they just never know when the people who they are trusting to do their dirty work get a bit fed up themselves about the way that things are going, and decide that it's time for change, because by God, they've got a lot of power, and they don't necessarily have to do something. Not necessarily, but if they allow something, if they allow Alexis Baden-Mayer to talk to Francis Richard Conolly, that might make a difference somewhere along the line. And this has happened, and it gives me hope. Maybe there's somebody inside the loop who's decided that enough is enough themselves, and they want to see the Donald Trumps and the Joe Bidens brought down. This is why at the very top they always make such efforts to control each other by having something really, really dirty on each other. So I think the mere fact that we've been able to talk and to share this broadcast in itself might be something significant. I certainly hope so. But while you were gone, I was explaining to Corey that you can't imagine how grateful I am to you that for allowing me to say everything that I said about Senator Antich and Joseph Mercola. Please let them know. I will be trying to get in touch with both of them. But I think that yourself and all of your viewers will be aware now of how difficult it is for me to get across just how important it is for some rich man somewhere, to support my work and to get it out to the whole world, and not just the English-speaking world, until the day that we have a uniformity of opinion against the rich. That is when real change will occur, because all of our problems, all of them, all come back to one source, and that is the people at the very top. There wouldn't even be a need for a consumers association. There wouldn't be a need for just about anything if it wasn't for the dirty things that these people are doing to us every single day. There wouldn't even be a need for a Green Party. There is so much that we wouldn't need to be bothering with if it wasn't for the fact that these people are, controlling the world like the devil incarnate every single day. But, I do think that they themselves at this moment will look at this summer. I was talking earlier about the 2 days, hot days that we had, and that woman who said that they'll probably make this into a distraction story. And once the 2 days were over, for once, I think there was a lot of truth in a mainstream media story on Yahoo, because they said that as soon as it was over, that the BBC Weather Centre was inundated with really, really, angry emails to all of the BBC weather presenters. And they were all saying, who the hell do you think you are, giving us all this bullshit about, the 40 degrees and, everybody's going to die. And, you make a crisis out of everything. All the railway trains, all the trains were cancelled. Just for you couldn't get a train anywhere. And they were saying, look, we're sick to death of you making a crisis out of every stupid bloody thing. It was just a couple of hot sunny days. What's wrong with you people? And the BBC weather presenters were really astounded that they were getting all of this hate. But to me, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of what is happening right now. It's people putting down a mark and saying, look, we're not going to have any, this whole monkeypox thing, nobody's buying it. Okay, the COVID thing happened and they took it, but the monkeypox thing, they just don't want to know, and I think they've already given up on that on that story. So I'm so grateful that you've had me on at this, what I consider to be a a very critical moment, and I'm just hope and pray that some wealthy man out there will realize that this is the way to make the next big change. I'm not saying that I'm the prophet who walks around in sandals and has a magic wand, but if people want to have some chance of making another big change happen, I do think the best thing, the way through it, is for my work to reach the whole globe, because it's already made such a difference in the English speaking world. And I hope that doesn't sound too arrogant, but I think that this is why it hit you so hard, and why it hit some other people so hard. And I'm losing my voice, excuse me. This happens every time.
Well, I think there was one thing that I wanted to share with you. We are coming up on the end of 2 hours. I can't believe I've been so long. It's very kind of you to take this time with me today. We were talking about anthrax and inhalation anthrax as perhaps a constructed situation. And in this time period that Monsanto was doing the aerial spraying of U.S. cities to perhaps simulate or perhaps just attack us with dangerous bacteria similar to anthrax, the government, including the Department of Defense and the Centers for Disease Control, in the late 1950s, like around 1957, they were also doing anthrax vaccine trials on uninformed people. And one of these events happened in New Hampshire at a textile mill. I think it was the Arms Textile Mill in New Hampshire. And there was an outbreak of anthrax. There were 5 people who died and 4 people, or I guess 9 people total who were sick. And I believe there were 4 or 5 deaths in this situation. And if you look at the reporting on this story now, or in recent years, there's a New Hampshire Public Radio story about it. And they say, but luckily, right at the same time that there was an outbreak of anthrax, the government was working on a vaccine. And they gave the vaccine to the anthrax workers after that. And so they had no more situations where people died of anthrax at this textile mill. So
Well.
completely goofy.
Well, do I need to comment, Alexis? You couldn't have told that story any better. I'm so grateful. For once, it's a strange situation for me. This, because normally I find myself sitting here being interviewed, telling people about the true things that have gone on in the world, and I know that quite a few people might be saying to themselves, "Well, this bloke's a nutcase. That couldn't have happened. The government just wouldn't do that, or they couldn't create something that big. They couldn't make something that big happen." I mean, for instance, whenever the royal family go out onto the balcony together, which everybody has seen, and they do the waving to the crown, one thing or other. Nobody, I think, up until sort of a year ago, would have believed me when I say that's a renter crowd. There's nobody there who gives a shit about them. They pay those people to wave the little Union Jack and make people think. And those tricks where they get people in a crowd to shout and cheer for the monarch, that trick goes all the way back to Henry I, Henry II. I mean, it's in the movie Thomas Becket. Huh. If anybody wants to check that out, they've always done this kind of thing. It's what the English have always been brilliant at. And up until very recently, it was only me telling these kinds of things, and to have somebody as articulate and you really come across as a lady who knows her stuff, Alexis. To have somebody else doing it is for me a revelation. You're so well versed in in what you know, and you tell it so brilliantly. I think the only thing I can say, bearing in mind we've only got another couple of minutes, is I really think you and I need to do this again, except maybe next time. I do think that the public would understand that for you and I, it's the kind of thing that we would really need to plan the broadcast and plan the questions differently. Maybe next time. I have had 1 or 2 interviews when I was on the Andy Young show. I did a lot of research because we're gone again. Can anyone hear me? Corey, Alexis, anyone?
I'm here. Sorry about that. I'm trying to do this on my phone, and I was trying to look at the chat, and I hit something accidentally. Sorry.
No, as I say, Corey, thing is, oh no, got it. It's still there. No.
All right, so I'm going to stop touching my phone.
It's just I remember you saying that you've got a meeting at 4 o'clock. So I think that probably the best thing. I think everybody would want you to wrap this up rather than me. So you go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll maybe talk another time.
All right, sounds great. Well, Francis Richard Conolly, the maker of JFK to 9/11, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. This movie is available at the Hidden Reality channel on Facebook, or sorry, not Facebook, on YouTube.
On YouTube.
And Francis Richard Conolly has it in book form, and you can get it at Trine Day, TRINE Day Publishing. I think it's just trineday.com. You can get the book direct from Trine Day. So I hope everybody will follow up.
Mention the Kindle as well, as you've had it on Kindle.
That's
yourself.
right. And it's available at Amazon. I got the Kindle version. If you can't wait, that's how I often am. I cannot wait for it to come in the mail. I need to watch it now, or need to read it now. And of course, if you got an email from Organic Consumers Association about this broadcast, the link to the film is there. And if we support Francis Richard Conolly's work, he can create a part 2 to Everything is a Rich Man's Trick and tell us about the years since 9/11, the more than 20 years. So Richard, Francis, thank you so much for being with us. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Next time, I'll have you just on our Rockfin channel, and we can have a very freewheeling conversation.
Well, I'm very, very grateful that you've had me on, and it's been a fascinating evening for me, Alexis. It's been really nice meeting you. I really mean that. It's been great. And thank you to Corey for being there in the background for both of us.
Yes, thank you, Corey. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.